Executive Suite with WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi.
Welcome to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nesi. Later on in the show, we're going to talk with some lawyers from Littler who know employment law better than just about anybody in Rhode Island. We're going to hear about some of the pitfalls employers and employees can run into. But first, I'm very pleased to be joined by Mike Reppucci. He is the founder and president of Sons of Liberty Spirits Company. You see some of their products there down in South Kingstown.
Yep.
And they make whiskey, craft whiskey. Mike, thanks for being here.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
So I think people will find this fascinating that whiskey's being made in Rhode Island if they didn't know that already. And we see a lot of this, and we're going to talk about it around new kinds of small craft beers, craft whiskey, etc. But first, where did you get the idea of starting a whiskey distillery?
So I went to business school in London, and instead of studying, I drank a lot of scotch and went on all the distillery tours. And I, grew up drinking the microbrew beers. I love them. And on the distillery tours, and I love single malt whiskey. On the tours, the tour guide kept saying, "Oh, this is the distiller's beer, the distiller's beer." And I raised my hand. I'm like, "What the heck are you talking about?" Turns out whiskey literally is a beer that you brew and then distill. And when I learned that, I'm like, well, why have I never had the beers I love turned into whiskey? I love stout beers. I like Belgian beers. And then I was thinking to myself, I'm like, well, why has there never been a seasonal line of whiskeys? Like, I look forward to the seasonal line of beers. So there's no reason. So that's when, I'm an Italian kid from Rhode Island, grew up making wine since I could walk. So I'm familiar with the fermentation process and stuff like that. So it's like, I want to do this. I love finance, but basically quit the job and started a distillery.
So for people who are not whiskey aficionados, walk them through. You mentioned how it starts off the same way beer, as I understand starts off. So walk people through briefly, how you make the whiskey that ends up in this bottle.
So the first thing is whiskey is the general category. So a spirit distilled from grain is whiskey. Bourbon, everyone thinks American whiskey, they think bourbon. Well, that's just a corn whiskey. It's over 50% corn. Everyone thinks scotch. They think, oh, single malt whiskey, scotch. Scotch just means made in Scotland. It's like champagne. It's a domain thing.
Okay.
But we make American single malt whiskey. So what malt means is we use over 50% malted barley. So if you think of beers, Bud and Miller Lite, they use corn. It's a light adjunct. It's a very light beer. They used to use corn. They use rice now. But the better craft beers, they use barley and different roast levels of the barley. And quickly, what malting means is you wet the seed, fool to germinate, a sprout comes up, and then they dry it. Mm-hmm. So if you ever had a peaty, smoky scotch, they literally put peat moss on the fire, and that smoke would dry it. Mm-hmm. But you can roast it like coffee, light roast, dark roast, like that, depending how much heat you put to it. So our Uprising literally is an unhopped stout beer that I brew, distill, and turn into a single malt whiskey. So you get this cool chocolate or coffee notes in it, but there's no chocolate or coffee at all. It's literally from the stout beer we brew.
Now, how big an operation is it to do that? Give people, paint a picture for them of what you're doing down in South Kingstown.
Yeah, I mean, we have a 3,000 square foot facility. I have a 250 gallon still made by Vendome Copper and Brass. It's really cool. They're fourth generation still makers out of Kentucky. The dude that made our still made the Jack Daniels, Jim Beam, and Maker's Mark still. So so it's not a super huge operation. We're getting bigger by the day, actually, but started out pretty small.
Where'd you come up with the name, Sons of Liberty?
Yeah, so I get that all the time. So you'll see the bottles, there's no dude with a musket on the bottles, right? Everyone expects that. But literally, I was a kid in finance that quit my job and started a distillery, and I tell everyone, like, how dumb is that? But how American is that, And that's what I'm really proud of. I went to business school in London, like I said, and I just learned, there's smart people from all over the world, but the one thing we have here in the United States is that entrepreneurial spirit. We'll take that shot, and I'm really proud of that. And so the Sons of Liberty were the dudes that started the American Revolution, So they're like, I'm sick of getting taxed, and I'm going to make a change with my life. So Sons of Liberty literally was, I want people to look at me and say, this kid started a distillery, and in 2 years, we'll talk about it, but we went from not knowing how to make whiskey. I learned how to make whiskey from the ex-master distiller, Maker's Mark. He was retired, taught me to make whiskey, and in 2 years, we're the first U.S. craft distillery to win a World's Best in Whiskey Magazine's blind tasting.
Now, tell me about that. You've had press releases out. You've talked about the American craft whiskey revolution. So, is this sort of a parallel to what we've seen in beer, where we went from all Miller Lite and Bud Light, in the 80s up to now? There seems like everywhere you look, there's a new, interesting, small craft beer being done.
Yeah, totally. So, yeah, it happened, in the 80s or so with the beer, started there. It's migrating the spirits. As the trends happen, it generally happens in California and out west, and we're pretty late to the party, in fact. We weren't the first in Rhode Island. Newport Storm made Thomas 2 rum, so they got the first license. I think since the 1800s, they're the experts on that.
140 years.
Yeah, and we got the second one. Our license is 2. But yeah, and so it's starting to pop up. There's really cool guys in Mass. And that's the best part about this. I mean, even with the beer guys, everyone's kind of doing it because they love it. So like, the guys in Newport Storm, they're awesome. We're friends. It's so cool.
So alcohol involves a lot of regulations. You kind of alluded to that. I mean, give people a sense of what you had to go through to be able to legally set up shop and start brewing this stuff.
So the feds, basically, they have you have to do it. Pretty easy. Do what they say and you're fine. I mean, the state, everyone says, and it's a narrative we got to get off. Everyone says, you started a business in Rhode Island, that must be terrible. It wasn't, actually. The only problem was, we're the second license since the 1800s. No one knew, So everyone was going through the process for the first time together. I think as more people start to do it, it becomes easier. That was the only hard thing. But yeah, the feds are, again, you do what they say, you're fine, and it's pretty straightforward, the process.
How long did it take you?
Yeah, a while. It took 9 months in total to get everything, closer to a year if you count everything. So it's a long process, but it's not anything like you'd think.
What did your wife think when you said, you know what, I think I'm getting off the finance track and starting only the second distillery license in Rhode Island in 100 and something years?
So I married my wife because she's the nicest person I ever met. And this isn't because we're on TV. She believed in me from day one, as did my parents. I mean, everyone thinks you started a distillery, that must be fun. I didn't take a salary for 5 years, and my wife and 2 kids and I live with my parents. So everyone believed in me, and so I've been blessed. It's not only my family, though. We've been blessed with people in Rhode Island believing in us and supporting us. I mean, that's the coolest part. Local has become hyper-local, but made in Rhode Island, it's been awesome. We've been supported by some of the best accounts. It's crazy.
How's business overall then? Give people a sense of the trajectory since you started this.
Yeah, so the beginning was like, hey, I'm Mike, please buy my whiskey. Since March, I kind of alluded to it, but we've won 15 medals in international blind tastings, the biggest of which was the World's Best from Whiskey Magazine. So we're the first U.S. craft distillery ever to win a World's Best, and the second U.S. distillery ever to get a World's Best designation. So the pumpkin spice was the World's Best flavored whiskey for the last year. That kind of just changed my business.
Really? Yeah. So that was a big transformative moment for the company?
It's just crazy. I mean, I tell people, and they're like, wait, World's Best? I'm like, yeah, dude, I don't believe it here. It's actually a funny story. We went to London to accept the award, and the MC was the editor of Whiskey Magazine, proper British dude. So he's like, Mike, I want to let you know your spirit won on the merit of the spirit. I'm like, thank you very much, sir. And he said, and we as judges love blind tastings because sometimes we're shocked by who won. It's like, thanks, dude, I think. Like, is that a dig or is that a compliment? I don't know.
Not a lot of pumpkin whiskeys in Britain?
No.
They weren't expecting it.
No.
So what are the challenges of success? People think of the challenges of failure, but success and getting big enough for it, I'd assume, can be a challenge too.
You're so right, man. That's actually what I'm dealing with now is like, we want to grow, but we realize the one thing that has brought the success is the quality. So we're actually putting kind of our hands around the growth and trying to manage that. I meet actually once a week with a kind of advisor. He's helped a lot of companies, and he says he sees just as many companies fail from growth and not managing it well. And he's right. So we want to keep that. We make it. So we make it. We buy the grains, we mill it, we make the beer, we distill it. And we need to keep that authenticity. So it's keeping that authenticity and the product quality while expanding.
While scaling up.
Yeah, it's hard.
I bet it is. All right, we're going to talk more with Mike Reppucci after a break about Sons of Liberty, and later on we're going to hear the latest on Rhode Island employment law and what you need to know. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi. We're going to talk later on this half hour with some of the top employment lawyers in Rhode Island about some of the things they're hearing a lot about and what you might need to know. But right now, very pleased to be joined by Mike Reppucci. He makes the fine Sons of Liberty whiskeys that you're seeing in front of you down in South Kingstown. And we're talking about the growth of that business. And Mike, give people, let them in on how many products do you have right now? Where are you? What are you selling out there?
So for the whiskey front, we have 2 single malts. So one is called Uprising. It's an unhopped stout beer we brew, distill, and turn into a single malt whiskey. Second is Battle Cry. It has 20% rye in it. We use a Belgian yeast strain to ferment it. So think like a Chimay Trappist beer. Starts its life that way. Then we rotate in seasonal whiskeys. In the fall, I do a pumpkin spice whiskey. We use 32,000 pounds of locally grown pumpkins. Carpenter Farm grew them for us. In the summer, I do a hopped whiskey. It's an IPA beer we brew, distill, and dry hop. And in Rhode Island, we actually make some vodkas. So we make a plain vodka, We do a mint cucumber vodka with fresh mint and cucumber. And then we do a dark chocolate vanilla bean, which is a little bit of a misnomer. We take cacao beans and roast them, and vanilla bean. So it's more like a roasted cacao bean. It's really a bitter chocolate. It's
and
nice.
you're in Rhode Island and Massachusetts,
Just
right?
Rhode
Do you have
Island,
plans to expand further?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that we're working on. We really want to be a New England brand, and our goal is to win our hometown. And we feel New England's kind of our hometown. So, you know, a lot of other craft distilleries take the trajectory of let's just get mass distribution. But we really feel like we're in such a great part of the country where we can really win New England, and that's what we're trying to do.
Now, there'll be people watching who maybe have never drank whiskey or are kind of afraid of whiskey or whatever they know. It could be a very tough liquor if you're used to like red wine or something. What's your advice for someone who's never had it or isn't a whiskey person to get started?
Yeah, I actually say all the time, I'm kind of a wimpy whiskey drinker. Like, my dad drinks the scotches that smell like he's at a campfire and taste like he's licking an ashtray, you know, and you're like, oh, what the heck? Not for me, right? So actually, our whiskeys, the goal was to create a smooth whiskey that had complexity of flavor from the original beers we brewed. So I would say Uprising actually is a wonderful introductory whiskey. It's very smooth, but it's complex flavors. I drink them neat with a drop of warm water. A lot of people do them on the rocks, whatever. But what's cool is the old school cocktails are coming back.
That's
and I don't know, you know, especially in Providence, some amazing accounts making great drinks. I would say try it in the cocktail. You know, go to some of those cocktail places. You can get it mixed, and you can really get the sense of the whiskey.
So you don't mind, even though you're distilling it, if it gets mixed in with some other stuff in there and it's not being drank pure and as is?
No, it's funny. I don't care. I love the drinks myself. And in fact, to see the value add that the best mixologists add to it, you're like, how are you pulling that note out of there? You know, like there's a drink, it's called the Blood and Sand with Uprising. It's an old school cocktail, but you get chocolate, like I put chocolate in the whiskey, and there's none. It's literally from a stout beer, but made correctly, it's so cool to see the individual components be pulled out.
So, Mike, we have new state leaders coming in, the new governor-elect and others and everything. So much talk about the economy, economic development, how to have more entrepreneurial stories like yours. Any advice you'd give if those folks came to you and said, all right, how can we make it easier? How can we get more entrepreneurship in the state? Anything you think?
Yeah, you know, so I don't know if you saw, we actually hosted the gubernatorial debate about food at my distillery. So we had all the, and the reason we did that was, and it's a long story, but in my finance degree in London, I went around and asked all the VCs and said, what is some advice you could give? Or
Venture capitalists.
Venture capital guys in London. And one of the things I found that they did really well over there was, so this is a great example. We have Johnson & Wales. The kids coming out of Johnson & Wales are so smart. They're amazing. We wanted to have interns, but we went to Johnson & Wales and said, okay, well, we need a curriculum, this and that. I don't have time to do a curriculum. I don't have this. Government can kind of work as the liaison to bring these businesses and these wonderful organizations together because they'll be learning how to make whiskey at a very high level or how to with a mixologist and stuff like that. So their students are getting a wonderful benefit and we're getting the benefit from them. So I think acting as the liaison between small businesses and the kind of institutions in the state, that's what they did wonderfully in London. And I think it would really help because it's a win-win for everyone.
All right, Mike Reppucci, that's all the time we have for this segment. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. Sons of Liberty, you can find it in your local liquor store, but don't go away. Coming up next, the gentlemen attorneys of Littler are going to talk to us about employment law and what's changing this year and next year. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi, and I promised that my guests don't have whiskey after that segment, and they were just drinking water still on here. But we're going to talk right now about employment law in Rhode Island with some folks who know it very well. This law firm puts out every year a sort of comprehensive review of what's going on in Rhode Island employment law. So joining me from Littler Mendelson is Eric Mack and John Doran. Thank you both, gentlemen, for being here.
Thank you.
So, John, I'll start with you. You're a shareholder in the firm, actually. So people might not know your law firm. Can just give them a thumbnail sketch of Littler Mendelson?
Sure. We're the largest labor and employment firm in the country. We have over 1,000 attorneys in close to 60 offices now in basically every state. We're still working on the Dakotas, but we'll get there eventually, hopefully. So we've been operating in Rhode Island since about 2006 at this point, and along with Eric and some of our colleagues, we have a nice, thriving practice down here in Providence.
Yeah, and you guys keep great track. You have some good stuff on your website, too, about when different laws pass and everything. So I'm going to start off with one that people might have heard about, actually. I'll go to you on it, Eric. Ban the box. That law that took effect this year. What does that law actually do, and what do employers need to know about it?
Well, the law, which is, I think it took effect January 1st, 2014, it basically prevents employers from asking about the applicant's criminal history on the initial application. But it's a little more narrow than other states in the sense that you can ask for it you can ask that information later in the interview process, but initially they want to allow employees and applicants the ability to get past that initial stage hurdle if they've had a criminal background. So the main thing that employers need to understand is that you can't ask the question on the application, but later on in the process you can. So that's what the overall process is.
So you can ask it.
You can ask, and this is a trend we're seeing across the country where a number of cities and states are just having to ban the box legislation. The idea is that, it used to be you'd get, 30 applications for a position, and if 3 of them, if somebody checked off, yeah, I've been convicted of a crime, those immediately went in the recycle bin right there. So the idea behind it is to get the person over that kind of initial culling process. You can still ask about it, and we strongly recommend that employers do ask about it, but it's the idea is that you can only do it once you get into the interview part of the process.
Interesting. Okay, so another new law on this one I don't know too much about, but it passed this year, I believe, restricts how much employers can access in terms of workers and job applicants' personal online content. What's in this law? What are the rules here?
Well, I guess I'll take this one up. It's basically a law similar to what John said. A lot of states have passed this law, which prohibits employers from asking the employees for their social media passwords, or even friend requesting the applicant or the employee while they're there just to gain information and access and mine their contacts and different things like that. So Rhode Island has followed a number of other states in then implementing this new law, and I think there is an exception to that law in the sense that if there's reasonable information that you're doing an investigation for an employee, then you can ask it there. But otherwise, you need to refrain from asking an employee, what's your Facebook password, what's your LinkedIn password,
So it's more about getting in. You can still look at someone's MySpace or their Twitter or whatever.
Well, there's different settings for each of those things. Some of the information is public, whereas some of it's private. So the public information you could look at, but the private information you can't, ask your colleague to go friend request so-and-so to look in, because there's a lot of ways people could think of to circumvent that process. You can't spy on them to get that type of password and things like that. So that's the main thing.
But I think you get to the problem there. It's that to a large extent, I think this is a law in search of a problem, because most of the things that we do is every time Eric and I get a new case, first thing we do is go to Facebook and see if we can find anything. And 25% of the time you find helpful, and we would say helpful, other people might say damaging
Same with the
information.
news story, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So usually what people put out there that's not password protected is still kind of stunning to me. And it's like I say, it comes up constantly, and it's a constant source of information from us. For us, it's a constant source of information for employers. Interestingly, usually most of the negative information that comes to light that's through Facebook, it's usually not the employer who's out kind of looking for it. It's usually actually coworkers who come to people and they say, well, here's an employee who's out on leave because they're claiming they can't do any work, and I'm working all this overtime, but here's a picture of them dancing at their high school reunion. So it's always one of the great ironies is that it's usually people voluntarily coming to us more so than it is our clients or even us really looking out for them.
The message there is also a bit of a warning to employees to say, well, if you put it out there, especially without any privacy settings, it's fair game.
It is, sorry, yeah, and it's amazing to me. It's just one of those things that people just don't understand. I remember my sister wanted me to talk to my 14-year-old nephew about what was happening, and I gave him that story about, well, every time I get a case, and that's the first thing I do, and he says, you can't do that. And I'm like, you want to bet?
Yes, I can.
One of us is a lawyer.
Yeah, exactly, but that's people just don't understand. They're like, well, it's my Facebook page, and it's like, well, you think about what you're putting out there.
One of the things that employers should be worried about, though, is for applicants. Somebody applies for a job, you haven't met the person yet, you Google them and look at their Facebook page, that might disclose certain information which would create a problem of a discrimination lawsuit down the line. So, for example, if you know that their race, their age, their gender, their sexual orientation, that information puts them in a protected class. So if you Google that and you have that information and then you deny them the job, some plaintiff's attorney is going to make the argument that you denied them on those bases.
That's it, because you can't unsee the fact that you saw a posting.
So you're trying to prove that you didn't prove a negative, which is very difficult and costly.
Another issue is pay. Obviously, minimum wage coming to $9 next year, but that's probably just a setting inside if someone's getting paid under that. But more generally, the biweekly pay law, this has been an ongoing discussion around. Biweekly pay was banned last state with that. Now it's allowed with restrictions. What are you guys hearing from employers about how this new biweekly pay, somewhat allowance for it, is working?
It helps, certainly, the news. So yeah, as you said, it used to be that in Rhode Island it was one of the few, I think, only states that you were required required to pay all hourly employees on a weekly basis. That was a major problem for Littler. As I said, we're a national firm, so we'd have, I get a call from a client in Texas, and they say, well, our entire payroll system is set up to be biweekly. We have 2 employees in Rhode Island. Do I really have to pay them weekly? And I said, yes. And they'd say, okay, maybe those employees are not going to be in Rhode Island that much longer. I mean, it was a major issue. It wouldn't seem like a big deal, but again, if you have
because I could see people saying, oh, those employers just say that. It's not that big a deal.
If you have a payroll system set up for 15,000 employees, it is a big deal to just carve out some of them there. So fortunately, it's changed. It wasn't just a complete change just to allow biweekly pay. There's an application process that you have to go through, which Eric has turned himself into, I think, the foremost expert in the world on it at this point in time.
It's a little complicated, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, when you do things a couple of times, you're the person that knows how to do it. You're the go-to person to the application process. So, yeah, the problem that employers struggle with the most is for the prior 12 months, you need to have what they call the highest biweekly exposure. So basically, the highest 2 weeks of salaries and all types of compensation. So the employer has to look back 12 months for all of its employees and see, like, in December of 2013, they spent maybe $60,000, and then 2 weeks before that, they spent $100,000. So you need to then get a surety bond from a company, basically in that amount, and then bring it to the Rhode Island Department of Labor and Training. And then you have to have that with all of the financial information back regarding the last year's salaries and all that stuff, and you have to submit that to...
Is that common in other states?
Is it common in other states?
Yeah.
No.
It's not something...
No, I think they just made it up, actually. They're still making it up after, the process has changed as
they go along. Another new law related to employment, that's temporary caregiver law. This, people might not know it exists yet. Some employers might be happy about that, but they expanded TDI for caregiving if you have a newborn, if someone is sick, etc. I don't know if either of you looked into that much, but how is the rollout of that going? Is it being used a lot, or employers understand it?
It seems to be, yeah. So basically, and I think it's Rhode Island's just the 3rd state in the country after New Jersey and California to pass a law where employees for something other than their own illness or disability are allowed to use a state disability leave program. So we've had a lot of questions about it from employers. There's concerns about how does it work, how does it fit together with FMLA, who's going to use it.
The Family Medical
Leave Act, excuse me. So we've had a lot of questions about it. We've fortunately so far we haven't seen any actual litigation come out of it, which is good. So hopefully it's working, but it's with a lot of these things, if you look at them in a microcosm, again, they don't seem like a big deal, but it's just, you talk about Mike, a small business owner like him, these are difficult things to keep on top of.
Only about 30 seconds left. You've been doing this a long time. What's the advice you get? What's a big pitfall you see employers make that they shouldn't?
I think the biggest thing is, I always say, it's documentation. It's, when you're dealing with a problem employee, it's hard to do. You want to focus on your business. You don't want to really take the time to write an email or write a memo out. I always try to tell clients, think of that as an investment at a time. Eric and I, we bill by the hour, and we're very good at keeping track of our time. So you could spend a half hour writing something up, or you could spend 3 hours talking to us down the road. I recommend you spend a half hour writing something up.
Good advice, even though it's bad for your business. Yeah. All right, John, Doran, Eric, Mack from Littler Mendelson, thank you so much for being here. I'm sure we'll be turning to you again. And thank you for tuning in. Be sure to tune in next week when our guests will be the owners of Greg's on Giving Lunch to the President. See you next week.